You were taught that being a good man meant being available. You answered every message. You were always there, emotionally present, endlessly understanding, permanently reachable. And at some point, they stopped noticing you. Not because you changed, but because you didn't. Because your presence became a given, your kindness became a commodity, and your silence was never taken as power, only passivity. You start noticing it in small moments. You enter a room and no one looks up. You speak, and it's like your words evaporate before they land. But when they need something, you're still the first they think of. Not because they respect you, but because they know you'll say yes. And in the quiet corners of your life, you begin to feel it. You've become dependable to the point of invisibility. They say, good guys finish last. But that's not the truth. Good guys never even enter the race, because they've been taught that asking for what they want is selfish, that asserting a boundary is rude, that saying no will make people love them less. And all of this sounds noble, until you realize it's made you forgettable. You didn't become a good man, you became a safe man. Harmless, predictable, emotionally available but existentially invisible. And now, the women you want don't respect you. The people around you take you for granted. And the younger version of you, the one who once dreamed of being admired, feared, desired, he's gone silent inside your soul, buried under layers of politeness and approval-seeking. Let's call it for what it is. You were programmed to disappear, not with violence, not with trauma, but with niceness. And the world doesn't reward nice. It rewards real. It rewards power. It rewards men who don't ask, because they don't need permission to exist. So here you are, exhausted, confused, and quietly, bitterly wondering why the more you give, the less they value you. The truth is this: you were trained to serve, but never to lead, to love, but never to protect yourself, to be good, but not to be respected. And deep down, you know it. You feel it. Every time someone texts you only when they need something, every time she says, "You're such a nice guy," with that distant smile that never means desire. Every time you bite your tongue just to keep the peace and then watch your soul shrink another inch. You're not bad. You're not weak. But you're definitely not seen. You thought being good would make them stay, but it only made you easier to leave. Mirror question. When did being good begin to feel like being invisible? You were lied to, not by bad people, but by a culture that feared strong men, by a system that found it easier to tame you than teach you power. So they told you, be nice and people will love you. Be agreeable and the world will reward you. Be available and she'll stay. But all of that was a soft leash, because what they really meant was, be compliant, be predictable, be easy to manage. And as a boy, you believed it, because you had to. Love felt conditional. Your worth was tied to obedience. If you didn't smile, you were scolded. If you spoke up, you were labeled difficult. If you said no, they questioned your goodness. So, you became what they wanted: pleasant, helpful, quiet, safe. But safe men don't lead. Safe men don't challenge. Safe men don't get chosen, they get used. And this programming didn't just kill your ambition, it numbed your instincts. You lost your edge. You stopped trusting your gut. You started asking for permission for everything. Permission to speak. Permission to want. Permission to exist. Because that's what you were trained to do. To seek approval before truth. To win favor before respect. To be good, even if it cost you your soul. And they called this virtue. But it wasn't virtue. It was domestication. They didn't raise you to be respected. They raised you to be useful. To say yes without question. To serve without boundary. To sacrifice without ever being asked. So when you hear a woman say, "He's such a good guy, but I'm not attracted to him," what she's really saying is, he feels like a role, not a man. Because women don't crave goodness. They crave truth, conviction, presence. And those things don't come from politeness. They come from power. But power was programmed out of you. You were told not to interrupt, not to confront, not to disagree. You were trained to blend in, to self-abandon, with a smile. And now, you're a grown man with the emotional posture of a boy trying to please. Not because you're weak, but because you were taught to believe that being harmless was the highest form of masculinity. It's not. Masculinity is not about being liked. It's about being unchangeable in the presence of pressure. It's about standing firm, even if no one claps. It's about not asking because you already know who you are. That version of you still exists, but he's buried beneath decades of fake goodness. They didn't teach you to be respected. They taught you to be tolerated. Mirror question. What belief about being good has kept you small? Let's talk about value, not in abstract terms, but in the emotional marketplace that governs every human interaction. Whether we admit it or not, every relationship runs on an invisible currency. Time, attention, energy, respect. These are not given freely, they are traded. And in this economy, the person who needs less always holds more power. Think about it. The person who cares less in an argument controls the tone. The one who can walk away calmly wins the negotiation. The friend who takes longer to reply suddenly feels more important. You've felt it. You've played by those rules. But here's the catch. You were taught to spend yourself recklessly, to give more, to over-explain, to reach out first, to love loudly without checking if you're loved back. You flooded the market with your presence, your affection, your yes. And when something is oversupplied, it loses value. That's what happened to you. You gave too much too soon. You made yourself emotionally cheap, not because your soul is worthless, but because your emotional strategy was bankrupt. You gave everything and got crumbs in return. You apologized for feeling. You explained your boundaries like you were pleading. You kept proving you were not like other guys. But in doing so, you confirmed something far worse. That you didn't believe you were enough without proving it. Here's the brutal truth. Value doesn't shout. It doesn't over-explain. It doesn't chase. It stands still. It lets people rise to meet it. That's why the man who doesn't ask commands attention. Not because he's arrogant, but because he's rooted. He knows his worth is not a favor. It's a fact. When you stop over-investing in people who undervalue you, you stop bleeding emotional capital. And suddenly, they see you differently. Not as the convenient, nice guy, but as a man who can't be bought with scraps of validation. You're not supposed to beg to be respected. You're supposed to expect it. Quietly, unapologetically. That's the real economy of power. And it begins the moment you stop paying with pieces of yourself. The more you give without demand, the less they think you're worth. Mirror question. Where in life have you overpaid emotionally and got nothing in return? You kept showing up. You kept giving. You kept being the nice guy, thinking if you stayed consistent, patient, emotionally available, someone would finally see you. But they didn't. Not the way you wanted. Because nice men don't inspire devotion. They inspire convenience. You became the friend she vented to, right before going back to the man who disrespected her. You became the employee they dumped extra work on, because they knew you wouldn't say no. You became the man everyone liked, but no one chose. And that's the silent death of the good man. Not dramatique, not violent, just invisible. The more you tried to be what they wanted, the more they stopped seeing you as a man with a spine. Because somewhere along the line, you confused likability with leadership. Let's make something brutally clear. If your presence doesn't challenge them, your absence won't affect them. You bent. You folded. You made yourself agreeable, soft, harmless. And in doing so, you killed the part of you that demanded to be respected. That's when the collapse began. Not outside, but within. You stopped trusting your own anger. You filtered your truth. You abandoned confrontation in the name of peace, but lost your own inner peace in the process. You thought you were being noble. but you were just avoiding being rejected. And now you carry the quiet resentment of a man who was never taught to draw lines, who was never shown how to be feared in the right way, with presence, with silence, with clarity. The truth is, you weren't respected because you never required it. And they won't give it to you retroactively. They've already decided who you are. They've already categorized you. He's sweet. He's easy. He's safe. And safe, in their eyes, means not serious. That's why the same woman who tells you she wishes men were more like you never actually chooses you. Because what she's really craving is not kindness. It's clarity, conviction. The man who doesn't apologize for taking up space. But you can't fake that. You have to become it. And the first step is letting the good man version of you die. You were never too nice. You were just too afraid to be real. Mirror question. Who stopped valuing you the moment you became predictable? Every man who's ever been ignored after giving his best eventually faces a moment of silence. But this time, it's not coming from others. It's coming from within. A moment when he stops talking, stops proving, stops chasing, and just listens. Not to the noise of expectation, but to the voice he buried years ago. It's not angry. It's not loud. It's just clear. This isn't who I am. This moment is the beginning of the Stoic shift. Not a performance, not a rebrand, but a return to stillness, to boundaries, to the discipline of being unmoved. You no longer argue for your value, you embody it. You no longer explain your limits, you enforce them silently. You no longer play therapist to people who treat your attention like a vending machine. And they notice. Oh, they notice. Because something in you has changed. Not your kindness that's still there, but your posture, your presence. You now understand something few men ever grasp. Power is not volume. It's direction. Your energy no longer leaks into unworthy places. You've sealed the cracks. You've withdrawn your emotional investment from people who never gave you returns. You no longer need to be understood. You need to be aligned. And that scares them. Because the man who doesn't chase can't be manipulated. The man who doesn't explain forces them to reflect. The man who doesn't ask reminds them he doesn't need them. And that's when they start reaching, calling, rewriting history. Where did you go? Why are you so distant? I miss the old you. But they don't miss you. They miss the access. The version of you that gave too much, asked for too little, and waited politely for breadcrumbs. That man is gone. He didn't get bitter. He got anchored, like a mountain in a storm. He stopped apologizing for taking up space. Like Epictetus once wrote, freedom is the only worthy goal in life. It is won by disregarding things that lie beyond our control. And now, you do just that. You don't argue with ignorance. You don't justify your silence. You don't perform emotional CPR on people who flatlined you long ago. You protect your peace like it's your oxygen, because it is. And for the first time in your life, you realize you were never broken. You were just too accessible. But now, you are available only to those who earn it. And that changes everything. Your silence isn't emptiness. It's a boundary. Mirror question. What happens when you stop asking to be seen and just start seeing yourself? Let's get one thing clear. Detachment isn't coldness. It's clarity. It's not about shutting down your heart. It's about learning when to close the door on people who leave it open too long. You don't become numb. You become aware of where your energy flows and where it's being drained. This is the moment when you stop confusing access with intimacy. You stop texting first. You stop explaining why you're pulling away. You stop waiting to be picked, chosen, appreciated. You start choosing yourself, not as an act of rebellion, but as an act of discipline, because that's what emotional detachment really is. Discipline with your soul. The discipline to say, I feel this, but I won't act on it. The strength to admit, she means something to me, but I mean more. And the wisdom to walk away, not because you don't care, but because you do, just not at the cost of your peace. You are no longer a slave to your triggers. You don't react to breadcrumbs. You don't flinch when they go quiet. You observe and respond with sovereignty. It's the way of the Stoic. Unshaken, rooted, not because he feels nothing, but because he has trained himself not to be owned by what he feels. That's how you earn respect. Not by demanding it, but by becoming a man who doesn't need it to move forward. You're not trying to be distant. You're trying to be honest with yourself first. And that kind of honesty, it radiates. It unnerves those who are used to you being available at their convenience. They'll say you've changed, that you've become cold, closed off, hard. But they're wrong. You didn't become hard. You just stopped bleeding for people who never brought bandages. You don't stop feeling. You stop leaking. Mirror question. When was distance the kindest choice you made for yourself? When a warm man goes cold, it doesn't go unnoticed. They feel it instantly. The shift, the silence, the space you used to fill with, "Are you okay?" or "Do you need anything?" now replaced by nothing. You stopped reaching out. You stopped explaining. You stopped playing the role they wrote for you. The safe man, the understanding one, the guy who's always there. And suddenly, your absence speaks louder than your presence ever did. They panic, not because they miss you, but because they lost control over how you show up. They say, "You've changed." Yes, you have, but not out of spite, out of survival. You're no longer willing to be loved conditionally, no longer available for emotional crumbs, no longer clinging to the hope that being nice will finally earn you loyalty. You've become uncomfortable for them, and that's the point. See, people don't respect what they can predict. They don't value what they can control. They don't chase what's always available. But when you detach, not with anger, but with intention, you force them to sit with their own emptiness. They can no longer plug their chaos into your calm. They can no longer drain your energy for their healing. They can no longer expect you to fold when they push your limits. And for many of them, that's terrifying, because they were never prepared for the version of you that doesn't ask. Not for time, not for clarity, not for closure. You've realized that silence is not a punishment. It's a boundary. It's the most dignified way of saying, "You no longer have access to who I used to be." And here's the twist. The more distant you become, the more they romanticize who you were. But that version of you, the over-explaining, over-giving, over-hoping man, no longer exists. They miss the echo of someone who used to need them. Now, you only need your peace, your clarity, your standards. That's the consequence of coldness. They feel the heat of your absence. And for the first time, they start respecting what they once ignored. Your absence will haunt them more than your presence ever moved them. Fry. Mirror question. Who finally noticed your worth the moment you walked away? He doesn't ask anymore. Not because he's bitter. Not because he's given up on connection. But because he finally understands this one unshakable truth. A man who knows his worth doesn't wait for it to be recognized. He embodies it. Quietly. Without announcement. Without demand. He no longer bends just to keep someone close. He no longer explains silence or justifies distance. He walks with a stillness that unsettles the insecure and inspires the awakened. He is not hard. He is unbothered. Because his peace is not on the table anymore. He no longer texts twice. No longer seeks closure. No longer volunteers to be misunderstood. He has no interest in being nice. He is precise. With his energy, his time, his presence, he knows the difference between kindness and compliance, between empathy and self-abandonment, between loving and leaking. And so, he chooses himself, not as a rebellion against others, but as a return to his center. They say he's distant now, too quiet, too serious. But the truth is, he's simply done performing, done chasing approval like a starving child, done hoping they'll finally notice his loyalty, as if it was a trick to be rewarded. He doesn't need to be seen. He sees himself, and in that seeing, He stands taller. He speaks less. But every word now has weight. He doesn't push. He doesn't persuade. He doesn't prove. He simply exists fully, firmly, and without apology. Because true respect doesn't come from asking. It comes from being the man who doesn't need to. The truly powerful man is the one who no longer needs to explain his silence. Mirror question. What would happen if you let go of being understood and chose to just be?